Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to Madhavi Desai on behalf of the Chairman and the Board of Trustees of CSMBS, the Director General, Mr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee, the staff of the museum, my Executive Committee on the Museum Society of Bombay, our members and guests who have joined us this evening. Thank you so much. And a big thank you to you, Madhavi ji, for giving up such valuable time and offering so generously to address us this evening on the topic, as Jason has said, women architects in India, historical and contemporary challenges. A few words about our speaker for this evening. Madhavi Desai is an architect, researcher, writer, and a teacher. She was an adjunct faculty at CEPT University, Ahmedabad, India from 1986 to 2018. She has had research fellowships from ICSSR Delhi, the Aga Khan Program for Islamic Architecture from MIT, USA, Sarai Delhi, and the Getty Foundation, also USA. She's the founder member of Women Architects Forum, and more recently, the Feminist Collective in Architecture in India. She is an author of several books and a co-author of several books. I'd like to mention just a few of them. Architecture and Independence, The Search for Identity, India, 1880 to 1980, published by OUP in 1997 and again in 2022. Architectural Heritage of Gujarat, Interpretation, Appreciation, Values by the Gujarat government in 2012. And the Bungalow in 20th Century India, the cultural expression of changing ways of life and aspirations in the domestic architecture of colonial and post-colonial society, published in 2012 by Ashgate. She is the editor of Gender and Built Environment in India, Zuban. She did it in 2007 and 2023. And Gender and the Indian City, Revisioning Design and Planning by the South Asia Press, New Delhi in 2022. She is the author of Traditional Architecture, House Form of Islamic Community of the Bohras in Gujarat. And this was with the Council of Architecture in 2007. And Madhavi ji, I would really like you to give us a talk sometime in early 2024, your schedule permitting, on this particular subject. And lastly, but not the least, Women Architects and Modernism in India, Narratives and Contemporary Practices by Routledge in 2017. Madhavi Desai was a co-founder of the Women Architects Forum from 1991 to 1996, and is also the founding member of the Feminist Collective in Architecture that was established in 2021. She is part of the nominating committee of the Berkeley Root Professorship and Prize at the University of California at Berkeley, USA since 2012 till current date. She was also visiting scholar in Gender and Women's Studies at the same university in 2014. She has made presentations at several national and international conferences. I have to admit over here that I'm very grateful to our member, Brinda Somaya, and a colleague of Madhavi ji for having introduced the two of us. I thank Brinda. It's been an honor to work with Madhavi Desai, and we're all looking forward to this lecture. A few words about the lecture now. Feminism has been one of the most significant social movements of the 20th century. It has had a vast and far-reaching impact on society at large, changing its very fabric and creating new identities for women. The women's movement in India has also affected both activism and scholarship in several fields. However, we have lagged far behind in developing feminist networks and frameworks or theoretical perspectives in the context of architecture. This illustrated talk is located within this context as studies on architecture in South Asia and perhaps even in the rest of the world, and continue to ignore women and canonical histories of the discipline. Women architects' careers in India nearly parallel the development of modernism in colonial and post-colonial periods. I'll rest now because we are all looking forward to hearing Madhavi Desai. So once more, on behalf of all of us, an extremely warm and grateful appreciation welcome to this talk for the CSMVS and Museum Society of Mumbai. I'd like to end now by thanking the technical team and Professor Jason John, who have really stood by us, really trojaned on, and helped us in all these Zoom talks. So thank you so much, technical team. And now over to you. And thank you once more. I'll see you at the end of the talk. Thank you, Madhavi.
Greetings to the audience from Ahmedabad. I'd like to begin by thanking Dr. Firoza Godrej for giving me this opportunity to share my work with such an esteemed audience. Today's topic is based on my research of many decades. The research was actually generated due to my own experiences of being an architect, a woman, and a mother in the 1990s. To give you a little bit of the background, when I was in high school, I viewed myself as a top student and I thought I was going to do very well in life. Even when I did my master's in architecture and came back to India, I assumed that I was going to be on the top of the field. But gradually I realized the several challenges that I faced, especially after I became a mother of 2 daughters. So I started working in this area gradually. And in 2017, this book of mine came out, published by Routledge. So today's presentation is basically based on the book, but it tries to go beyond it. So, as we know, women, and that includes the non-binary genders, is not a homogeneous category in India because there is a huge intersectional influences of class, caste, religion, community, education, occupation, etc. So, however, I will generally be referring to middle class urban women for the purpose of this presentation. Next, please. We also wear several identities in the society. We are, of course, objects of male desire. It is a patriarchal society. We are respected and put on a pedestal as a mother, or motherhood is highly celebrated. Very often, the religion uses the millions of goddesses as saying how good the status of women is in the society. And Indira Gandhi was, of course, used as an empowerment of women in India. But in reality, we know that we are basically a hypocritical society and there are many issues that women have to deal with. And there is no actual equality that is being projected. Next, please. Before we go further, I'd like to quickly refer to the women's movement in India. There is a great resistance to being called a feminist. Especially that's what I found when I did the book and I interviewed the contemporary successful women. And that, I think, one of the reasons is that people believe that feminism has come from the West and that it destroys families and that one has to hate men to be a good feminist. But I think it's because we don't know enough about the women's movement in India. Even though I feel that the origins of the movement lie in the colonial time period. And it kind of is embedded in the anti-sati stance, as well as the British education which the men started going through. It is very important for us to understand this, and this is not taught in schools of architecture in India. Next, please. Now, if we look at the other turning point came when Mahatma Gandhi led the freedom struggle. And during that time, especially in the 30s and the 40s, women across all socioeconomic class, this is very important, that when it became a mass movement, it touched all lives. And they came out of the home, the four walls of the home. And when I say home, I say read the kitchen. And they were then began to participate in the public realm. And they did several things as listed here. But I think especially that atmosphere created simplicity and the whole sense of service and sacrifice, which has, of course, disappeared now. So by the time independence came, there was already an established value for higher education, if not professional education. But the fact was that the education was valued in general more for the woman to become a better wife and a mother, and not so much for her own personal growth or career development, at least till the middle of the 20th century. After independence, increasingly more and more women began to join the public realm. First, they used the stereotypical feminist jobs like stitching and tailoring, cooking, becoming teachers. But gradually there was a change, and science, engineering. This was also the time when women began to join architecture. So what was happening in the architectural front at that time in the pre-independence? So one of the styles that came to India was the Art Deco, which was like a precursor to high modernism. And here we have some excellent examples, especially Mumbai has some really beautiful examples which are still surviving. But so if this was an external influence, we also had an internal influence, which was the Indian population was very much involved in the freedom struggle, especially after the Quit India movement of 1942. And many people, especially in the private residences, adapted the Art Deco, but tried to bring examples of Indianized architecture, which you can see in these three examples. So which we call Indo-Deco. And then, of course, we have high modernism, which has affected us at least throughout the 20th century and beyond. Now, it came to India as a dominant paradigm that was intrinsically connected to the colonial rule, especially the British Raj. But I think we have still to understand how really modernism developed. What was the local influence on it? Anyway, so we also have, with Pandit Nehru bringing in Le Corbusier, his impact lasted for decades. We also had our own Indian architects who had studied abroad and had come back to work in India. So we have some international masters, and we had our own Indian masters who for decades have done excellent work. And generally the perception of modern architecture in India is related to these male architects. So after I finished my studies and came back from the US, the question that really bothered me was this: where were the women architects? Were they there or not? And if they were there, why were they written out of history? Because throughout my undergraduate education, and even when I was teaching for many years, the students did not know much about who were these women, you know. And so this was the beginning of my search for the book. And this is the place where I must confess that my own book has several limitations. It took me 10 to 12 years to put it together. There was not much of financial support or institutional support. And I could dig up about 7, historic or what I call first generation of women. And then some contemporary architects I could cover. But it is important as the beginning of the work. So let's go ahead. Now, why talk about women architects in the 21st century? I'm sure a lot in the audience think that this is not necessary. But my main quest is, where is her story? And I am extremely aware that this is a contested position. There are two schools of thought. Most men and women consider themselves gender neutral. And as I've said here, we are taught through our education that the built environment is gender neutral, and we assume that our cells are gender neutral. And because of that, we really downplay the gender angle. Also, there were other things like there are no architecture archives in India until very recently. One has started in SAPT University. There are very few monographs. There is one on Brinda Somaya and I think one on Chitra Vishwanath. But I think one of the main reasons is also that a handful of successful and famous women architects in India are greatly celebrated. They are invited everywhere and they are shown as a showpiece of the success of the profession, that there is no discrimination. So we are going to talk about designers, their challenges and the agency. But before that, I usually like to talk about the other very important and related aspect is how men and women use space and how gendered spaces arise, which needs to be taken care of in design. So when we become from biological beings to cultural, socio-cultural beings, through that process, we learn certain patterns of behavior. And very often, we take spatial discrimination for granted. We don't even realize it. And also the other reason is the invisibility of this discrimination. It is not as strong or graphic or disturbing as honor killings or dowry deaths or sexual and physical violence, domestic violence. So that is why this particular issue has remained kind of dormant. So if we look at the women and the public spaces, men and women in the public spaces, very often we see what, a Wild Loiter book calls, loitering men or hanging, man hanging around. They all generally have a lot of time. This is outside a tea shop. This is outside a village. And I think all the women in the audience must have felt uncomfortable because of the male gaze sometime or the other. There is also a huge risk factor. This is the parking lot of a very successful shopping center, which is on top of this. But here there is not enough lighting, etc. And the public toilet, the less we talk about, even though there is some improvement, but in the small towns, small cities, this is still a big challenge for us. And not only in public spaces, but in private spaces also. There is a discrimination of genders. Now, this is a 1940s or 50s plan, and I was shocked to find one ladies' room, which is given in this big extended family house, while the men probably use the sitting, the drawing room, visitors' room, etc., the main entrance. And also, you can see, how they engage with the outside. But I also want to point out that as the role of women, a woman changes in the society, it is reflected in the spatial layout. So for example, this is the modernist house of architect Hasmukh Patel, built in the 1960s, and we can see that living and dining being combined. So these are the issues which need to be looked at by designers. And also coming to the city level, it is not that we can ignore that, because if the prediction is that in 2050, if the urban population is going to be 60%, and these are some of the findings, which is based on this article by Kalpana Vishwanath, we need to have gender conscious urban planning, design, governance, policy making, management, etc. I'd like to give one example that the Mumbai MMRDA plan of 2034, where so many women groups fought for gender inclusion. They have successfully included many things, but for example, crashes, women's community centers, women's shelters, and whatnot. This is another issue that we don't have time to get into. Also, there are some positive happenings. For example, the she taxis everywhere. This is an example of women's only park. These are the women from slum areas who are learning how to fill up forms. And here are some women who are participating in design. But also, I think we need carefully designed and located lighting, small neighborhood parks, gender-oriented transport planning, and a lot of other things. So coming back to the women architects, why have we not gathered critical mass? Unlike, for example, women in newspaper media or TV media, or maybe social media, or interior designers, fashion designers. It is, and I agree that it is a struggle for most new entrants, which is men and women in the field of architecture. It is not easy to start a practice, and unless you have you belong to the upper crust of the society. But women face many more barriers than. And especially I would like to stress, these are some of the reasons, and I would like to stress the fact that achieving work-life balance is extremely difficult. So here you can see the male star system that I already talked about. Also, there are many misconceptions about the profession. Most parents and even students think that it is an artistic desk job, while one has to in actual reality, the design is probably limited to 10, 15, 20%, but we have to, get the job, deal with the male construction workers, male consultants, clients, and in a patriarchal society, these are all challenges. We also have the legacy of craftspeople, because most of the men are the main craftspeople, even though women in traditional and village societies have always participated, their labor is not generally recognized. And also because the profession does not pay much attention to the gender issues, the women construction workers, what wages they are paid, what happens to their housing, what kind of skills or non-skills they have, what happens to their children, the children's education. These are the issues which are by and large ignored. And there is this whole story I've written somewhere else about, looking at education. When one goes through education, one strongly believes that it is gender neutral, everybody is given the equal opportunity. But there are subtle differences and there are subtle issues and not so subtle issues which need to be addressed. One of the main problem or the concern is that even though more than 50 or almost 70% women students graduate, they are only about 17 to 20% are seen actually working in the profession. And not many of them rise up. So now coming back to the women architects issue, what I call the first generation, where I showed those 5 very important women, what were the challenges they faced? So in a patriarchal society, there was a joint family system, especially in the first half of the 20th century, where an individual, especially a woman, could not take her own decisions. And a great importance was attached to matrimony. If you got a good house and a husband, then, most of the parents were happy. Most of the women were happy, unless, as a rule, of course, there were exceptions. But I think the women that I have studied went much beyond this resistance, and they actually carved a path for the rest of us to follow. So the first from my research, this is the best I could do, Perrin Mistry, a Parsi woman from Mumbai, studied in Sir J.J. School of Art in the architectural section. And she joined her father's firm in 1936. To the best of my knowledge, she is the first woman architect of India. She was married with 3 children, but she kept her maiden name in the professional life. She had a prolific and varied practice, and she was also interested in several other things. These are some of the projects she's done in Mumbai. It's been very difficult to get information on her. Her son is alive and her niece, and I've tried my best. Here you can see the Art Deco influence, state of the art at that time on her projects. Yuli Chowdhury, an extremely important person who worked closely with Corbusier. When I went through school, I did not know about Perrin Mistry. I had not heard about Yuli Chowdhury. I think only people in Chandigarh and Delhi know about her. Just a few days ago was her 100th birthday, and they celebrated it in Chandigarh. And I think this is the time period. Now people are, going to research about her. She was also the first woman to head the State Department of Punjab. She was very talented. She was a teacher. She designed furniture. She wrote articles. This is some of her projects. Even though she was working very closely with Corbusier, she came out with her own modernist vocabulary. Gira Sarabhai from my own city. She always refused. I tried to interview her several times. She always refused that I have not designed anything, but I think she was an extremely important visionary and an institution builder. She did not get a degree in architecture, but she trained with Frank Lloyd Wright in Thalias and West for 6 years. And, as I've written here, she curated the Calico Museum of Textiles. She did the first textile design studio in Calico Mills, also set up a graphic design agency. I think all these women that I'm talking about need at least a small book of themselves. Unfortunately, most of the archival material, I don't know if it is there or mostly gone. This is the Darshan apartment, 1954, designed by Gira Sarabhai in Mumbai. It is said to be the first multi-story building in Mumbai. This is an extension she did for her brother and Bhabhi's house in Ahmedabad, and you can see very clear influence of Frank Lloyd Wright on that. And as years went by, her own attitude to design changed, and she very often used traditional fronts and traditional facades to create contemporary buildings. Pravina Mehta was probably the only one that I had heard about when I was in school. And unfortunately, we did not realize her importance. And she was in Mumbai, but never met her. She was also very talented, had a master's from Chicago, was a classical dancer, and she also mentored many students over the years. This is her architectural work. Not many people know, but she got the client, the Kanchenjunga apartments that Charles Correa has done, but she was also a partner in that design. But most importantly, with Shirish Patel and Charles Correa, she introduced the concept of the new Bombay. And that, very little material of her work is remaining with us. Hema Sankaria was the only one I was able to meet. She was a beady smoking kind of a rebel. She was married with 3 children, but she managed to have a practice. She also managed to establish India's first contemporary lifestyle store with Vaina Modi called the Contemporary Arts and Crafts. And she was a hardcore teacher. She taught almost till the last years of her life. These are some of her other projects. A very interesting early modern house, which is no longer existing. She also did housing, and she did some projects with Charles Correa in Bhopal. Minette De Silva, even though she belongs to Sri Lanka, I thought that one must acknowledge her because she studied at Sir J.J. and she was an absolute rebel and a free and bold thinker. Just in the last 5 years, scholars have started working on Minette De Silva, and we might have a book. There is already a book which she had started, which she could not finish, but we may have some more work on her. And we need to do much more for our first generation of architects. So which were the challenges they faced? I think that, unfortunately, the documents, drawings, photographs of most of their work have not been preserved, but one has to try. I could only do so much within the limitations that I had. I would like to stress that their value as pioneers goes way beyond the buildings they designed. They really created something that the second generation and the following generations could follow. Also, I want to say that they were rebellious, headstrong, and visionary. They had a strong, assertive character, high commitment, and a very professional attitude. Also, most of them, all of them actually belong to either the elite class or the higher middle class. And that helped them develop their career. Now, coming to contemporary practices, again, I was only able to cover a limited, and I can only show you just a few. There are very few single woman-led practices. The husband and wife model, the practicing together, has become very popular in the last 30, 40 years. I myself started my practice with my husband till we stopped the practice and got more involved in writing and research and documentation. But now many mainstream projects, large projects, urban scale engagements are coming to some of the women. The conservation preservation arena is having more and more successful women practitioners, and we will see some examples of all of this. In the mainstream, of course, Brinda Somaya leads the way. She has a single woman practice. She's earned many, many awards and is internationally recognized. She has a very impressive and a broad range of portfolio, which deals with not only several scales, but several socio-economic situations, from a school in rehabilitation of a school to large institutional projects. Revati Kamath, we lost a few years ago, unfortunately. She started working and experiment with mud. At the time, mud was not very popular. And then towards the end, she also explored steel as a material. She was very talented and has many projects to her credit. She used to work with Vasant Kamath, her husband, but she had her own presence and her own personality in the field. Chitra Vishwanath from Bangalore is now extremely well known. She does sustainable work with appropriate technology, and has been mentoring many young architects and students in the last at least 3 decades. Sonali Bhagwati from Delhi works with Saurabh Dalal, her husband and partner. She has, it's kind of a corporate practice, has many important clients, and is very well respected in the field. Vandana Ranjit Singh works with her partner and husband Ranjit Singh. Vandana is a prolific designer and a dedicated teacher. She's very low key, and not many people know about her. But I'm very happy that I was able to include her. Lata Raman from Kochi works with Jai Gopal, her partner and husband, but has her own identity in the kind of work she does. I'm only showing Lata Raman from Kerala because at the time my book came out, I did not know many others, but there is excellent work going on in Kerala. There are many sincere women practitioners, and I believe that it is because of the tourism that a lot of them get projects where they are able to use vernacular principles to contemporary designs. Anjali Yagnik used to practice with Vijay Yagnik in Bangalore, and Vijay passed away, unfortunately, about a decade ago, and Anjali has taken over the practice, has many repeat clients, and is doing very well. She was also the dean at SEPT University in last 3 years. Sujata Shankar from Chennai has her own practice, and beyond the practice, she's a kind of a cultural figure in the city, connected with the music scene, with art and culture intact. And recently she did this book, she co-authored the book on Madras. Nisha Matthew practices with Sumitra Ghosh, an extremely successful practice where I feel that they try to design out of the box, even though they are kind of bound by modernism. They kind of break the grid, and I was very happy to cover her. Meena Mani joined the practice of Joseph Allen Stein along with Anurag Chopla when Stein was still alive, when he took on the younger partners. And then after Stein passed away, both of them carried on. Now she's retired and she's teaching at SPA. Shimul Javeri Kadri from Mumbai an excellent designer. She's one of the few people who are out there to help women practitioners who realizes that there is a need to go beyond one's personal success. Archana was one of the few government architects that I was able to interview and include her work. She was a junior architect, and her work was also supported by Sumit Kaur, and who is, I think, in the audience, and also by somebody else. But these were few examples of sensitively designed government projects. Auroville is, there is a whole niche of women architects in Auroville who are singularly practicing. I am again not able to cover everybody, but she's one of them who uses not just the vernacular architecture, but into contemporary designs, but she also tries to use local materials and sustainable principles. Mona Doctor, proud to say, is my ex-student, is a very sensitive designer, and she has created her own identity in Auroville, goes beyond design. She's part of, many other projects in the city. Anupama Kundu, who originally started her practice from Auroville. This is her house, which became very popular, and that sort of gave her a great push. And she has done other projects in India, but then she moved to Europe many years ago. She practices at both the places. She has done a book. She has been teaching in Australia, in America, in Europe, and is a very successful architect. In conservation, I don't know why, but there is a whole group of women who have been doing very well, and I could only cover two of them for this presentation. Meena Jain, unfortunately, we lost her just a few months ago, was a leader in conservation. She has done extensive projects in Rajasthan. She also taught at SEPT University and has done a lot in the field of conservation. Gurmeet Rai, most of her work has been in the north of India, especially Punjab. Keeps doing more and more work and is very well respected. There are just a few architects who I could cover are in activism and community work. Neera Adarkar is a vowed feminist. She's a designer, educator, activist, writer, and she has done a lot in the gender field in India. And we have Pratibha Joshi, who successfully runs an organization in Pune called Shelter Associates. She works closely with the slum redevelopment, building toilets, and doing extensive work for the last 20 years. Has been winning many awards. And I think, she needs to really extend herself and train other architects. So, what are my design conclusions? I'm not going to be able to go through all of these, but I'd like to stress that rather than directly copying Western solutions, many of these women struggle to arrive at an Indian consciousness of design. Though they are affected by global aesthetics and images, the urban, social, and financial context of India are very important to them. And the meaning of professional work in the careers of the women profiled here is plural and fluid. because they not only do design work, some of them do pure research, some of them teach, some of them go for juries. So their professional identities have several aspects. But most important is that this is the second generation, and I call them second generation. They have made a substantial and qualitative difference in the profession. I'm sorry, I was not, with the limitation of my book, I was not able to cover the third or the fourth generation. And there is a distinct change probably in the very young people who are part of the profession. Also, I believe that it is crucial to break down the wall between the personal and the professional, because we don't have separate lives. We are just have one life, common. So what were the social kind of conclusions that I came up with? So I felt that, they were, of course, the beneficiaries of political reform, women's movement, and modernity during the second half of the 20th century. They also got special encouragement from the liberal parents. Many times I found that their grandparents' own progressive outlook affected them. Many of them in those days that used to happen. I belong to the second generation, and I learned classical dance. I learned painting. I learned drama. In the South, as we know, many people learn classical music. So all these were part of their making of their personality, even though they finally focused on architecture. And especially compared to a lot of my Western friends who are very surprised that most of these women were able to have a family life along with successful careers, which I think is a great compliment to our Indian society. So what is there in the future? I see a paradigm shift in the professional and social conditions. Women are increasingly becoming patrons, which makes a lot of difference. But most of all, the younger women are more ambitious than ever before, with far greater awareness of career paths and a better sense of self-worth. They are beginning to delay marriage and delay having children for the sake of their career. Travel has become easier for a single woman. Now there are floors for women in some of the hotels. But at the same time, there is a need to work at several levels, especially to create gender sensitization, counseling, mentoring, etc. I don't have time to go through this particular thing, but these are the areas that I have listed where we need to very strongly work so that we can have an alternative presses, so that women do not need to drop from the profession for which they have worked so hard for 5 years. This is what Firoza referred to. Some of us women tried to have Women Architects Forum to deal with some of these issues in 1990s, but it kind of petered out in 1996 or so. Here, our group, after our first meeting in Ahmedabad, is meeting Gira Sarabhai, and she, talked to us. These are some of the activities we tried to do. Brinda Somaya led these two very important conferences in 2000 and 2020, and I don't know how much impact these have had. And as she mentioned, very recently, we have started this feminist collective in architecture to again deal with some of the issues that I talked about women in design and women using space. And we've had 2 successful symposiums, but we are struggling because we don't have finances and we don't have institutional support, which we have consciously denied. These are some of the activities that our feminist collective does. And I invite all of you to come and participate or support us in whatever way you can. Thank you very much once again.